The colony of Meridia was not known to the galaxy, and even among humans it was almost forgotten. A world far out on the edge of charted space with no great cities, no powerful fleets, no trade routes of value, and no natural resources worth stealing. It was a world of quiet plains, rolling hills, and endless fields where human settlers lived simple lives, growing crops, raising families, and watching the stars at night from wooden porches. Their ships were old, their weapons nearly non-existent, their communication so weak that messages often took months to reach Earth or any nearby human world. If any planet deserved the title of Earth's weakest colony, it was Meridia, and the settlers wore that truth with quiet acceptance. They had come here, generations ago, not to seek power but to seek peace. Many of them had ancestors who fought in old wars against alien empires. They were tired of endless bloodshed, so they chose a world no one wanted and built their lives upon it. They raised barns. Instead of barracks, planted wheat instead of bombs, and built schools where the lessons were about soil and weather, instead of tactics and strategy. The children grew up barefoot, running through the grass, and the adults worked long days with machines that were patched together 100 times over. They were not warriors anymore. They were farmers, dreamers, and survivors of a quiet, forgotten dream. Yet the galaxy has a way of never leaving humanity alone. Word traveled even to forgotten corners, and when the Krell Dominion sent scouts across the rim, their eyes fell on Meridia. To the Krell, it looked like the perfect target, a weak, undefended colony ripe for conquest, a chance to send a message to humanity that their expansion was still. Under alien watch, the Krell were cruel and calculating, and their commanders laughed as they prepared the fleet that would descend upon this tiny human settlement. The reports they gathered described the colony as fragile, the humans soft and unprepared, and the defenses non-existent. It would be an easy war. A short war. The kind of war that earns medals without cost. On Meridia, life went on with no knowledge of the danger. A boy named Daniel carried water from the well to his family home. A girl named Clara chased a stray animal through the grass near the barns. Old men repaired fences and old women baked bread for the children who returned hungry from the fields. They watched the sun set without fear, and when the stars came out, they dreamed of nothing more than good harvests and strong families. It was the calm before the storm, though. No one on Meridia could yet sense it. The first warning came from a farmer who had set up an old telescope on a hilltop. He liked to watch the skies not as a soldier, but as a dreamer. Yet one evening his hands trembled as he adjusted the glass and saw dozens of dark shapes moving across the stars. They were ships, warships, moving with formation and precision. So unlike the scattered freighters that sometimes passed near Meridia. He ran to the village, shouting to anyone who would listen. The people gathered outside their homes, confusion turning to fear as they saw the lights of engines glimmering against the void. Some tried to call Earth, but the signals were weak and would take weeks to carry and weeks more for any reply. A few wanted to flee, but their ships were too old and too slow. The reality sank into their hearts. They could not run, and no one would save them. They were alone. And so whispers spread across the colony. The Krell are coming. The Krell are here. Families gathered their children. Men gripped old rifles that had not been fired in decades, and women prayed at the old stone chapel that stood in the center of town. Fear gripped them. But beneath the fear was something older, something deeper. For while Meridia had been built as a place of peace, it had also been built by survivors. These people had no fleets, but they had endurance. Their ancestors had faced extermination. Before and still they had chosen to endure and live and thrive. They remembered the stories whispered from generation to generation, stories of Earth, a world called a death world by alien tongues, a place where storms and beasts and even the ground itself tested those who lived there. That blood still flowed through their veins, and though the colonists had grown used to peace, they had not forgotten how to endure when survival demanded it. As the alien fleet drew closer, and the stars above, filled with burning engines, the people of Meridia stood together on the hills watching their doom descend. They did not yet know how they would resist. They only knew they must. They would not bow, they would not break. And though the galaxy believed them weak, a forgotten colony with no chance of survival, something the invaders arrive. The night sky of Meridia had always been peaceful, a canvas of quiet stars that comforted the settlers after long days of work. But that night, it was filled with dread as streaks of light cut across the heavens like burning scars. The Krell fleet had arrived with dozens of warships descending from orbit, their dark hulls gleaming like jagged knives against the pale moonlight. The colony shook with the thunder of their engines. The animals panicked and people gathered in fear, watching death approach from above. The invaders came with arrogance. Their commanders did not even bother to mask their arrival or cloak their signatures, for they believed this to be nothing more than a formality. A weak colony of farmers and dreamers could not resist them. And so the Krell ships descended in formation, casting long shadows over the fields and homes of Meridia. From orbit they sent a single broadcast, a message, filled with mocking tones and demands. Surrender your world, surrender your lives, surrender your loyalty to the Krell dominion or be destroyed. In the town square the settlers gathered in silence as the words echoed from the old comm towers. Some cried, some held their children tightly, some clenched their fists in rage. The colony had no army, no fleet, no hope of calling for help. But there was a strange stillness in their eyes as they listened. They had lived too long in peace to embrace war easily, yet they also knew that peace built on surrender to monsters was no peace at all. At the edge of the gathering, an elder named Jonas spoke with a voice rough from years of work. He reminded them that they were descendants of those who had fought and bled in wars long past. He reminded them that their ancestors had survived storms on Earth that could crush cities, beasts that could tear men apart, and enemies who believed humanity would break, but never did. He looked into the eyes of the colonists and told them that if they were to die, then they would die as humans, not slaves. His words spread like fire through the crowd. As the Krell ships lowered into the atmosphere, ready to deploy their troops, the colonists moved quickly, not with the chaos of panic, but with the quiet order of people who had long prepared for a day they prayed would never come. For though Meridia looked like a weak farming colony, it was not blind to the dangers of the galaxy. Hidden beneath barns, beneath grain silos, beneath the very earth itself were weapons not of conquest but of survival. Rail cannons disguised as water towers, drones buried in the soil, like seeds waiting to rise, and shield generators hidden in windmills. Every piece of the colony had been built with more than one purpose, for the settlers knew that even in peace the galaxy was never safe. The Krell could not see this. They looked down from their command decks with sneers, seeing only fields and huts and old machines. To them it was laughable to think these humans could resist. Their leader, Commander Veyron, barked orders with confidence, sending waves of transports down to the fields. They would land, capture the colonists, and strip the world clean before the humans had time to scream. But when the first transports broke through the clouds, the colonists did not scatter. They stood together in silence, their children hidden in shelters. Their old rifles loaded, their eyes watching the skies with unflinching resolve. For fear was there, yes, but it was joined by something greater. It was joined by defiance. The Krell believed they were landing on helpless ground, yet every step they took would soon prove otherwise. Daniel, the boy who once carried water, now stood beside his father, holding an old weapon with hands that trembled but eyes that burned. Clara, the girl who chased animals through the fields, now sat at a control console hidden beneath a barn. Her fingers hovering over activation switches she barely understood yet, was ready to use. Jonas, the elder, moved from family to family, steadying their courage with a word, a hand upon a shoulder, a reminder that they were not weak. Above them the transports spread out in formation, preparing to land. Krell soldiers armed with plasma rifles stood ready, their faces twisted in alien grins. They imagined themselves heroes, victorious warriors crushing another human world. Yet none of them could see the storm that was about to rise from this so-called weakest colony. None of them could imagine that in a few minutes their laughter would turn to screams and their pride to terror, as the first Krell ship lowered its landing struts and the soil of Meridia shook beneath its weight. The colonists drew a collective breath. The sky was no longer theirs. The ground was no longer theirs, but their spirit remained unbroken. The invaders had arrived with arrogance and contempt. But the people of Meridia knew what the galaxy had forgotten. They knew that humans know. Matter how far from Earth, we're still children of a death world, and no death worlder ever dies quietly. The stage was set, the Krell eager for their easy conquest, the settlers standing at the edge of despair, yet braced with iron in their hearts. The HFY battle had not yet begun, but the moment hung heavy in the air like the silence before a storm, and when it broke it would shake the galaxy to its core. The secret of the colony. When the Krell transports descended like vultures ready to feast, they believed they were landing upon helpless prey. They imagined the humans would drop to their knees, beg for mercy, and hand over their land without resistance. They did not know that Meridia was far from the weak and broken world it seemed. For generations, the colonists had lived under the shadow of fear. They knew that one day, perhaps not today and perhaps not tomorrow, but someday, an enemy would come and try to take what was theirs. That knowledge shaped every decision, every structure, every tool, until the colony became something much more than fields and barns. It became a fortress disguised as a farm. The soil itself carried secrets. When the settlers first arrived, they had dug deep, not only to build wells, but to carve out tunnels. These tunnels became hidden passages linking farms to each other, and leading to underground bunkers stocked with supplies. Within them, entire families could vanish in moments, leaving nothing above but empty homes waiting to be burned. The barns that looked so old and weathered were not only shelters for animals. They hid armored plating within their walls and floors that could open to reveal control stations and weapons. The water towers that stood tall against the horizon were not water towers at all, but rail cannons disguised with wood and metal skins waiting to turn the sky into fire. This knowledge passed quietly from one generation to the next. Parents told their children stories about storms and predators, but mixed within those stories were instructions about secret switches and hidden doors. Every child knew that beneath the wheat fields were drones buried like seeds, machines built from scavenged parts and old war technology crafted by hands that had known how to fight. The colonists never bragged about these things. They never told Earth, they never told the galaxy, because their peace depended upon silence and surprise. As the Krell soldiers disembarked from their transports, their boots striking the soil with arrogance, the humans moved with quiet precision. Clara sat beneath the barn, surrounded by blinking lights and old screens. Her fingers rested on the console she had been trained to use since she was little, though she had never believed the day would come. Her voice shook when she whispered into the hidden comm line, telling the others that the enemy was on the ground. Jonas stood above, watching from the town square, cane in hand, his old eyes fixed on the skies, while beside him Daniel gripped his rifle like a lifeline, waiting for the signal to act. The Krell mocked as they advanced through the fields. Their weapons glowed, their armor gleamed, and their voices carried laughter when they looked upon the old machines of the colony. They thought the humans would run, but instead the farmers stood unmoving, their silence unsettling to the invaders. Commander Veyron barked an order to take prisoners and burn the barns, but just as the Krell raised their rifles, the ground itself betrayed them. A hidden hatch opened behind a row of windmills, and from within rose the first of the colony's drones. Its metal body shone in the moonlight, its cannons humming with deadly power, and within seconds others followed until the field seemed to erupt with machines. The laughter of the Krell stopped, replaced by confusion. They turned their weapons toward the drones, but before they could fire, the water tower that had stood for decades shed its disguise. Metal plates slid aside, and a rail cannon revealed its long barrel with a sound that shook the valley. A blinding flash erupted, and one of the transports exploded in mid-air, raining fire across the fields. Panic spread through the Krell ranks as more barns and silos revealed their hidden hearts. What they had thought were simple farming tools turned into engines of destruction. The colonists did not cheer. They did not cry out. Instead, they acted as if this had always been the plan. Men and women moved into tunnels, directing power to shields. Women guided their children deeper into the bunkers. Elders gave quiet orders to activate traps. Every settler had a role, and they fulfilled it without hesitation, for they had been raised for this moment, a moment they prayed would never come but always knew might arrive. The Krell commander screamed for order. But even as he shouted, his words were drowned out by the roar of weapons. Clara pressed the first switch, and a silo door blew open, revealing a battery of rockets. She pressed another, and a drone swarm lifted from the earth like a cloud of steel wings. Daniel fired his rifle, striking down the first alien to step too close. Jonas raised his cane like a signal, and all across Meridia hidden defenses came alive. The Krell had come expecting submission. Instead, they had stepped into the heart of a death-world trap. Meridia was no longer a quiet colony. It was awake, and the galaxy would soon learn that what appeared to be weak could hide strength beyond imagination. The secret of the colony was no longer hidden, and the storm was about to begin. 7 minutes of hell. The first strike came so suddenly that the Krell did not even understand what had happened until their ships were already falling from the sky. The rail cannon hidden in the water tower roared again, sending a slug of metal faster than sound through the belly of a transport. The explosion lit the night like a new sun, and the shock wave rolled across the fields, flattening grass and throwing Krell soldiers to the ground. In the chaos, the humans moved with purpose, their hidden machines rising from silos and their drones pouring out of the earth like swarms of angry insects. Commander Veyron shouted orders, but his voice was lost in the storm of destruction. The Krell were trained warriors, yet their training did not prepare them for this. Instead of unarmed farmers, they faced weapons that struck with precision and speed. Each barn became a bunker, each field a battlefield, every direction held death for the invaders. Clara sat in the underground command room, her hands flying across the controls as she unleashed wave after wave of drones. They moved like hawks, circling the Krell ranks, their weapons cutting through armor and shields while the soldiers scrambled to form lines. Daniel stood with his rifle pressed to his shoulder, his father beside him firing from cover built into the stone walls of a farmhouse. Together they picked off Krell soldiers one by one, their shots steady and unflinching. The Krell transports tried to lift back into the air, but rockets hidden beneath the wheat fields shot upward with screaming trails of fire. Strikes hit engines, wings, and cockpits, ripping through metal until burning. Wrecks fell back to the ground. The sky turned red with falling debris, and smoke curled over the colony, making it look less like farmland and more like a battlefield from ancient war. Every minute brought new horror for the invaders. The first minute shattered their formation. The second minute broke their courage. The third minute filled their ears with screams of their dying comrades. The fourth minute saw their transports destroyed. The fifth minute drowned them in fire from drones. The sixth minute crushed what little resistance they had left, and the seventh minute sealed their fate when the rail cannons fired together once more, tearing apart the last of their command ship, in orbit which fell like a star burning against the horizon. 7 minutes, that was all it took. 7 minutes to turn arrogance into terror. 7 minutes to change Meridia from the weakest colony into a legend. The Krell survivors who still stood found themselves surrounded by machines, by humans who had risen from every house, every barn, every field with weapons in their hands. Their eyes showed no fear, only the steady calm of those who had accepted that this fight was necessary. Commander Veyron fell to his knees as his command screen went dark. He had led fleets against powerful worlds before, but never had he faced such destruction, delivered with such speed. He realized too late that he had never understood humanity. He had thought them weak because they chose peace, but he saw now that peace had been their disguise and survival had always been their true weapon. The colonists did not cheer as the last Krell ship fell. They stood in silence among the smoke and fire, listening to the cries of the wounded, both alien and human. They moved quickly to secure the field, gathering prisoners who dropped their weapons and begged for mercy. The elders ordered that no unnecessary cruelty be shown, for though the Krell had come with blood in their eyes, the settlers would not abandon their own humanity. They bound the survivors, placed them in makeshift pens, and turned their attention to the fires spreading across the fields. Jonas stood in the town square, his old cane still in his hand, watching the horizon burn. He whispered that the storm had come and gone and that Meridia still stood. Clara emerged from the bunker, her face pale with exhaustion but her hands steady. Daniel looked at his rifle, the barrel smoking his chest heaving with every breath. He could hardly believe what had happened. He had thought himself only a boy from a forgotten world, but now he had fought and survived a battle that would echo across the galaxy, Above them the stars shone again. But they were no longer the same sky. The people of Meridia looked upward and knew that their secret was gone. The galaxy would learn what had happened here. The Krell survivors would carry their fear back to their empire, and others would come either to test the humans or to fear them. The weakest colony had become the strongest symbol, and the story of 7 minutes of hell would travel farther than any fleet. The battle was over, and the colony had won, but none of them fooled themselves into thinking this was the end. It was only the beginning. The survivors' terror. The battlefield of Meridia lay quiet in the hours after the 7 minutes of fire and thunder. The smoke still curled from the wreckage of Krell ships scattered across the fields, their twisted hulls glowing with heat, while the scent of burnt metal and soil clung to the air. The humans moved among the ruins in silence, carrying their wounded, treating burns and binding broken bones. They were alive, and they were victorious, but they did not celebrate. Their world had changed forever, and they knew that the galaxy would soon look upon them with different eyes. The captured Krell soldiers huddled together in pens fashioned from the wreckage. They no longer looked like warriors of a mighty dominion. Instead, they trembled, their claws shaking, their eyes wide with disbelief. Some muttered in their own tongue words of despair. Others simply stared into the distance as if trying to erase the memory of what had just happened. Commander Veyron sat apart from them, his armor shattered, his once proud face pale with shock. He had believed the conquest of Meridia would be the simplest of victories, and yet in less than 10 minutes his fleet had been destroyed. His soldiers scattered and his name cursed among the dying. What haunted them most was not the scale of their loss, but the manner of it. They had expected resistance, but what they had faced was something far worse. It was the cold efficiency of a species that had learned to hide its claws until the perfect moment. The humans had struck with such speed and coordination that the Krell could not even comprehend the tactics. Entire squadrons were erased before they could raise shields, entire lines of soldiers crushed before they could fire a shot. It had been like standing in the path of a storm with no shelter. Among the prisoners, whispers spread like fire. They spoke of the hidden machines that had risen from the soil of Meridia, like demons of steel. They spoke of the barns that had opened to reveal cannons and the silos that had spat fire into the skies. They spoke of the humans who fought not with panic, but with calm precision. Men, women, and even children who showed no fear as they faced an empire's soldiers. They spoke of Jonas the Elder, whose cane seemed like a banner of defiance, of Clara, who controlled armies of drones from beneath the earth, of Daniel, whose rifle cut down warriors twice his size. Their words grew into stories, their stories grew into terror. And even before the Krell left Meridia, the legend of its defenders began to take shape. When the prisoners were loaded into broken transports to be sent back as a warning, the humans treated them with a strange mercy. They gave water to the thirsty, they bound wounds, and they did not strike the defenseless. This unsettled the Krell even more. Mercy was not what they expected from Deathworlders who had just crushed them with ruthless speed. They could not understand why their captors would show restraint, but in that restraint they saw something worse than cruelty. They saw confidence. For only a people certain of their strength could afford to spare their enemies. When the Krell survivors finally departed under escort, their minds were already filled with fear. They imagined how their empire would react to their reports. They knew they would face disgrace, but worse, they knew the truth could not be hidden. The galaxy would hear of Meridia and its 7 minutes of hell, and once the story spread, no alien would look upon humanity in the same way again. Back on Meridia, the colonists gathered to count their dead. Their losses were few compared to the enemy, yet every name mattered. Families wept together while others stood in silence, staring at the fires that still burned across the fields. Jonas walked slowly through the ruins, his old eyes heavy with both sorrow and pride. He told the people that the Krell had come to break them, but instead they had awakened them. He told them that humanity could no longer hide in the shadows because the galaxy would never forget what had happened here. Clara sat at the console, her hands trembling now that the battle was over. She thought of the switches she had pressed, the drones she had commanded, the lives that had ended because of her orders. She had done her duty, but she felt the weight of it pressing down. Daniel cleaned his rifle in silence, his father beside him. Their faces were solemn, yet in their eyes burned the fire of survivors. They had stood against an empire, and they had not only survived, but triumphed. For the Krell who escaped Meridia, the nightmares would never fade. They would remember the roar of the rail, cannons, the flash of the rockets, the silent determination in human eyes. They would remember the helplessness of being crushed by those they had mocked as weak. They would carry those memories across the stars, and in every telling the fear would grow. The weakest colony had become a story to frighten soldiers, a story to remind empires that humanity could never be measured by appearances alone. And so the terror of the survivors became the first echo of a legend, one that would not die but grow stronger with every whisper across the galaxy. Humanity's message. The fires on Meridia smoldered for days, and in that time the colonists worked together to rebuild their homes, their barns, and their lives. They buried their dead with honor, placing stones upon the graves so that future generations would remember the price of survival. Yet as they worked, their thoughts turned again and again to the same question: what would come next? The Krell had been defeated, but they would not remain silent. They would return, and the galaxy would soon hear of what had happened in this forgotten corner of space. Jonas gathered the settlers in the town square, where the smoke of battle still lingered in the air. His voice, though old, carried strength. He told them that the world would know of Meridia, and that they could not hide any longer. He reminded them that while they had lived in peace, their ancestors had lived on Earth, a planet so harsh that other species called it a death world. He said that every child of Earth carried within them that legacy of survival, and that the galaxy had just been given a reminder of what it meant to be human. The people listened in silence, some afraid, some proud, but all aware that their lives would never again be simple. Clara sat beside the console deep underground, staring at the blinking lights. She had been chosen to send the message to the wider galaxy, for her hands had already guided the colony through its darkest hour. Her heart was heavy, but her resolve was clear. With the push of a switch, she activated the old comm array hidden within the hills, and her voice carried across the void. She did not beg for mercy, nor did she boast of victory. Instead, she spoke plainly to every species that might hear her. She said that Meridia had been attacked by the Krell Dominion, and that the Krell had been defeated in 7 minutes. She said that this colony was considered the weakest of all human worlds, yet it had stood and endured and triumphed. She said that humanity did not seek war, but neither would it bow to threats or slavery. She warned that every colony, even the smallest, even the quietest, carried within it the spirit of Earth and the strength of a death world. She ended her message with words that would echo across the stars. If you come for us, be ready to pay the price, because humanity may look fragile, but humanity will never fall. The message spread like fire across the networks of the galaxy. Alien merchants heard it in distant ports, soldiers heard it on the edges of war fleets, and even rulers in their palaces paused to listen. Some dismissed it as human propaganda, but others felt the weight of fear in their hearts. They had all heard whispers of Earth's brutality, its strange ability to survive where others would perish, and now they saw proof in the ashes of a Krell fleet crushed in minutes. The name of Meridia became a warning. In the halls of the Krell Dominion, the survivors of the battle delivered their reports, trembling as they described the hidden defenses, the swarms of drones, the terrible silence of human fighters. They tried to explain how they had been defeated so quickly, but their words only spread confusion and fear. The leaders of the Dominion raged, demanding to know how a farming world had turned into a fortress. Their anger could not erase the truth. Humanity was not weak, and even their weakest colony had humbled them. Back on Meridia, the settlers waited. They repaired their windmills, their silos, and their homes, but they kept their weapons close at hand. Daniel practiced with his rifle each day, no longer a boy, but a defender of his people. Clara studied the consoles, learning every system with greater care. Jonas walked among the fields, reminding each family that vigilance must never end. The battle had been won, but the war of survival would never stop. The galaxy listened, and the galaxy whispered. Some species saw hope in the humans, believing that perhaps this stubborn race could stand against the empires that had oppressed them for ages. Others saw danger, believing that humanity, if left unchecked, would rise like a storm to consume all in its path. Either way, none could ignore them anymore. Humanity had spoken through fire and steel, and the message was clear. They would not be prey, they would not be broken, and they would not be forgotten. The legend begins. The days after the message of Meridia spread across the stars were unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. What began as whispers turned into fearful reports, and what began as scattered rumors turned into a legend. Entire empires debated the truth. Some alien leaders called it a lie, saying no. Small colony could crush a Krell fleet in minutes. Yet the survivors of that battle carried the truth with them, and their words shook the confidence of even the strongest powers. They spoke of barns that became fortresses, of drones that rose like a storm from the soil of a farm world, of rail cannons that tore the skies apart, and of humans who stood without fear against impossible odds. On Meridia, life slowly returned to a fragile normal. The settlers rebuilt their homes, retilled the damaged soil, and planted their fields again. But everything had changed. The children no longer ran through the grass without thought. Now they carried pride with their play, pretending to hold rifles or drones, as if they too would defend their world one day. Daniel carried himself no longer as a boy, but as a young man forged in fire. His eyes looked to the stars with both caution and determination. Clara grew quieter but stronger, her hands steady at the console, her heart learning that duty often carried weight heavier than any machine. Jonas, though, old, walked with a new kind of purpose, for he had lived to see proof that the spirit of Earth still lived even on forgotten worlds. The legend of the 7-minute war reached Earth, and when the words were read in the halls of leadership, silence fell across the chambers. The leaders of humanity, who had long believed Meridia to be nothing more than an outpost of farmers, now realized that those farmers had carried within them the truest strength of their kind. The reports of hidden defenses did not surprise them, for they knew the bloodline of humanity was filled with stubborn survivors. What surprised them was the speed and unity with which the settlers fought. It reminded them that no matter how far apart human colonies were scattered, the spirit of Earth tied them together like unbreakable iron alien worlds. Meanwhile, watched with unease. Some species that once mocked humanity now spoke with respect, and others with fear. Fleets began to change their patrols. Warlords hesitated before launching raids, and even traders reconsidered cheating human merchants. The name Meridia became more than a place. It became a warning whispered across space. They say if even the weakest human world can do this, then what would the strongest do in? The Krell Dominion shame turned to fury, but their fury was shackled by doubt. The memory of their fleet burning in 7 minutes haunted them. Their soldiers, who had once boasted of easy victories, now looked over their shoulders at shadows. The commanders planned revenge, yet even as they did, they questioned if it was worth the risk, for what if another forgotten colony held the same secrets? What if Earth itself carried weapons far beyond imagination? The people of Meridia did not seek fame, yet fame found them. Traders who visited carried stories back to their worlds, some true and some grown taller with every retelling. They said that humans could turn stones into weapons, that even their children fought like warriors, that death itself feared to touch them. The settlers listened to these tales with quiet smiles and carried on with their work, knowing that legends were often more powerful than fleets. For legends could stop wars before they began. As the sun set over the fields, Jonas gathered the colony once more in the square. He spoke of pride and sorrow, of the lives lost and the lives saved. He told them that though the galaxy now knew their name, they must never forget who they were. They were farmers and dreamers, yes, but also defenders of their families, their homes, and their freedom. He reminded them that humanity's greatest strength was not only in weapons but in unity and the will to endure. The people raised their heads and felt the truth of his words. They had faced destruction, and they had survived. They had stood together, and in 7 minutes they had written a story that would echo for centuries. And though they wished for peace, they were no longer afraid of what might come, for they knew that even in the darkest moment humanity would rise again. That night, as stars filled the sky, children listened to their elders tell the story of the 7-minute war. Their eyes grew wide as they imagined the drones rising, the cannons firing, and the Krell fleeing in terror. The children whispered to one another that they would be ready if the day came again. And in those whispers, the legend of Meridia grew stronger, carried not just by fear across the galaxy, but by pride within every human heart. The galaxy had underestimated humanity once, and in that mistake it had birthed a tale that would never be forgotten. Earth's weakest colony had become its strongest symbol, and from that day forward, no empire dared to look upon humans as prey without remembering the fires of Meridia. The story that shook the stars. The Battle of Meridia ended in 7 minutes, but the echoes carried far longer than fire or smoke. The settlers who had once lived in obscurity now walked with the weight of history on their shoulders. They were no longer just farmers, they were guardians of a legend. Every stone, every field, every barn now felt sacred to them, for the soil held the memory of a people who refused to surrender. Families returned to their routines, yet even the smallest tasks carried new meaning. When children ran through the fields, they carried wooden rifles on their shoulders, pretending to defend the skies. When elders told stories at night, the tale of Meridia joined the old myths of Earth, becoming a song of survival that would never fade. For the survivors of the Krell, their defeat became a wound that no empire could ignore. They had believed themselves superior masters of war, and yet they were undone in less time than it takes to speak a prayer. They dreamed of the storm that had consumed them, the flashes of light, the roar of cannons, the silence of human eyes that promised no mercy for invaders. They spread their fear across the stars, and every retelling made the legend grow. The Krell leaders spoke of revenge, but fear held their tongues, for they knew that if even a farming colony could strike with such fury, then what horrors would await them on worlds that truly prepared for war. Humanity listened to the whispers and stood taller because of them. The leaders on Earth recognized that the mask of weakness had fallen forever, and the galaxy now knew the truth. Humanity had been tested by firestorms, predators, and wars across ages. They had been underestimated again and again, and each time they had risen stronger. Meridia proved this truth in 7 minutes, and now all of humanity carried that proof like a banner. The settlers of other colonies heard of the story and felt pride bloom in their hearts. They knew that if Meridia could stand, then so could they? And that together they would never be prey again. Clara walked among the rebuilt barns and touched the consoles that had guided the drones. She no longer saw herself as a girl who lived in the shadow of stronger worlds. She saw herself as a defender of her people, one who had proven that duty could be heavier than fear. Daniel polished his rifle each evening, not with the joy of victory, but with the understanding that one day it might be needed again. Jonas stood at the edge of the fields, cane in hand, watching the horizon with steady eyes. His voice carried to all who listened, telling them that humanity's greatest weapon was not its machines, but its will to endure. And so the name of Meridia became more than a place. It became a warning to empires and a source of pride to humans. It was told in marketplaces, in soldier barracks, in council halls, and in whispers among the stars. They say the weakest colony defeated a fleet in 7 minutes. They say that humanity will always surprise you. They say that if you test them, you may not live long enough to regret it. The settlers did not seek to be heroes, but heroes they had become. And as the sun set across the quiet fields, and the stars returned to the sky above, they knew the truth: they had survived.